Okay, now we are at Prospect Hill. So I've kind of showed you where Washington took command. I've shown you where his residence was. Now a little bit about the soldiers. Now, after conquered Lexington, the soldiers were able to push the redcoats, the British regular army, back into Boston proper, which is behind me. You can kind of see the skyline, just kind of bits and pieces of it. The American army, most of it, a good chunk of it, kind of all gathered in uh, Cambridge, the Cambridge area. And they decided, they kind of needed a fort. They needed somewhere, a high ground to be able to bombard the regular army in Boston. And it was suggested that on Prospect Hill, where I'm at now, there would be a great place for a fort, a citadel, if you will, where they could use, and not only for defense, but also for offense. It is on this exact spot where that citadel was located. And I'm going to kind of walk around a little bit of this area so you can kind of see it from where the park is. This area became known as Somerville. I'm going to kind of show you a little bit of what that looked like pasture area into this little town. This is a very important area because this is where, like I said, where a majority of the British forces could be viewed from where the colonial army had command of the area. They had the support of the locals, and they could easily see into Boston from this location. And the Citadel, the fort, took a little while to get built. It wasn't actually until after the defeat at Bunker Hill that the construction of this fort took place. Now, we're looking at like 5,000 or so soldiers, American soldiers, that were all camped in this area. This area now is all, modern residential. In fact, that's part of the reason why they put this monument here. The original fort was taken down, but as the area started developing in the late 1800s, late 1900s, there was a risk of having the entire space being controlled just by housing development. And so, along with some of the other locations I've shown you, they decided they wanted to solidify certain areas as being kept as monuments and remembrers of the Revolutionary period. Don't forget, in 1868, people of Boston woke up to see the John Hancock's house. The former governor of Massachusetts, his house was gone. Now, he had donated the land that was his cow pasture to the state to build the state house, where the current state house currently is at. But one morning, people of Boston woke up in 1868, and his actual house was just gone. The developers wanted to build, townhouses, and a lot of Boston was being developed so quickly they were losing some of the historical sites. Boston cared about these sites, but, they just never thought that anyone would ever take them down, anyone would ever move them, anyone would ever decide that it wasn't worth keeping. And about that time, they said they're not going to just allow anything to be developed, overbuilt, and they wanted to preserve their historical areas. In the 1880s and 90s, as immigrants came in rapid succession, it was decided they were definitely going to preserve these spots and build monuments and memorials throughout the city of Boston. Along with the Dorchester Heights, this area, Prospect Hill, was purchased, and they decided they were going to make a memorial. And that's what you see behind me right now. The height of the Citadel was reportedly about the same height as this monument here is. Also, you see that flag flying behind me. That's the Grand Union flag. That's the flag that was used, for the Army under George Washington up here in Boston. And it is the very first place that flag ever flew was right here. This spot, on January 1st, 1776, Washington raised that flag for the very first time. It is commonly known also as the Cambridge flag because it was flown in what was at the time Cambridge. And it's a very, very special place here for everyone around here. Asking people how to get here, everyone knew about it. This was, unlike the Washington elm where most people have kind of forgotten about it, this base was not forgotten. They purchased the land and they made actual plans to develop it into a historical monument. And they did this, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This dedication took place in 1903. So just a little bit after the dedication at Dorchester Heights, which you will see next. A couple interesting things. So this is where the majority of the lines were, the major encampments for the Continentals was in this area. And there was a gentleman by the name of Benjamin Thompson, who was from a neighboring town of Waban, and he was constantly suspected as being a loyalist. And loyalists weren't treated very well within the Patriot camps, and he had been chased out of one town after another, being arrested time and again, but they never had any proof. They never had any proof ever that he was guilty of anything. And he actually had a really good friend who was a dedicated patriot named Isaac Baldwin. Now, Baldwin was, everyone vouched for him. Everyone knew that there was no doubt in their mind that Baldwin was definitely a patriot. But for Benjamin Thompson, it was always in doubt. And he got arrested, again, drugged down to Cambridge and jailed. While he was here, he wrote a letter to the basically the colonial government of Massachusetts, asking for an impartial hearing so he could prove his innocence. He wrote it, by his hand, and it was delivered by Isaac Baldwin to the authorities that be here in Massachusetts, and they agreed to hear his case. Now, they had no proof whatsoever, zero proof that Thompson had done anything wrong. Is they let him out, and then Baldwin led him around the camps, took him along the American lines, all up and down. There were like 20 to 30,000 soldiers here from different times, and he got to see the provisions. He got to see the organization. He got the lack thereof, actually, and it was fascinating just how he was able to get all this easy, free access to the area, and then he just disappeared one night. He ended up sneaking into Boston because he was, in fact, a loyalist. And there was, he just, as far as everyone else, he just disappeared. And he ended up getting to London after Boston was evacuated. And he served the British government in the realm of science and physics. He was really renowned and well known for his technology and research in gunpowder. And he became a count, actually. He became a count called Count Rumford. And he would die in, I believe, 1814 in Paris, France, being a very popular and well-beloved scientist in Europe. But he was an American-born, American-grown loyalist. And it's just interesting that Isaac Baldwin was killed at Bunker Hill in June of 1775. And so he went to his grave not realizing how treacherous his highly revered friend was. They grew up together. They were friends. They were both friends in aspects of science and technology, and that's the reason why Baldwin was so adamant about proving that his friend was in fact not a Tory. Now, in the 1920s, when people were researching through General Gage's papers, they found this letter. Now, this letter is significant because it looks just kind of like a boring letter. It's nothing of significance on the face of it, but literally just the face. When they started reviewing the letter and noticing, they decided, we're going to apply an old 1700s technique to find out if there's any invisible ink, any invisible information on this letter, and that's exactly what they found. Not only do they find detailed descriptions of the disarray of the Continental Army, lack of supplies, and it's really near this falling apart, but it was written in the exact same handwriting as the letter written to the continental authorities here in Massachusetts asking for an impartial hearing. It was, in fact, a letter written by Benjamin Thompson, a spy for the British. So there's always this, how great Washington spies were, and why, and it's true. The Culpeper ring, and Long Island was instrumental. I mean, it allowed Washington to have knowledge of the British movements throughout the entirety of the war, and we didn't find out about that until the 1930s. Actually, so a lot of these spies, they were so well kept, they were so protected that we didn't know who they were until the 20th century. Also, a really important aspect about this area. So, during the siege of Boston, Washington gets here, takes command in early July, between 2nd and 3rd of 1775, and he realizes his army has no supplies. They don't have the cannon. They don't have the ability to actually besiege Boston City, and so they have to figure out a plan. So he has one of his trusted people, this colonel, who really wasn't a colonel, he was a bookseller. He was a bookworm. And in fact, his bookstore, London bookstore, was very popular with the British officer corps. But the thing is, this young man studied all these books himself. He learned Latin, not just so he could, read, classical literature and philosophy, but so he could read and understand the tactics of Julius Caesar. This is long before Napoleon, so he was reading up on the tactics of ancient Rome and Greece. He learned those languages for that purpose. His name was Henry Knox. Knox is important because Washington realized he had not the supplies to fulfill his mandate of getting the British Army out of Boston. Knox comes up with an idea, and in November, he says, what, the best way to do this, let me go to Fort Ticonderoga in New York. This is a place that back in May, Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold was able to capture from the British forces. And there were a lot of cannon, a lot of supplies, lots of goods in Fort Ticonderoga. The problem was it's 300 miles from here. Washington said, I don't even know, that's a long trip. Knox said, I can do it. Washington gives Knox $1,000 and says, good luck. Knox sets out to Fort Ticonderoga, and he arrives there in early December. They believe around December 5th, November 6th. And he surveys and he takes an inventory of all the supplies at Fort Ticonderoga. And he said, what, I can get this. He picked up 59 pieces, shot, powder, other supplies. They stripped the fort clean the best they could. And then they headed back, the 300-mile return trip to Cambridge. Now, this trip becomes known as the Noble Train. A couple of cannons of note was one that was made out of brass, and it was called the Old Sow. And Knox would use the money that Washington gave him to pay contractors in New York to load these wagons up, these cannon up on wagons, rent oxen, and forge the northeast. The upstate New York, and all the way through back to Cambridge. He arrived back here on January 25th of 1776. One cannon actually fell through the ice in the Hudson near Albany, and he fished it out. That cannon becomes known as the Albany. Washington now has the guns he needs and enough powder to set a trap for the British. The problem is where he's at here on Prospect Hill, he doesn't have access to shoot the ships coming in to support the British to the Boston Harbor. He's got to move his cannons, he's got to move his guns all the way over to Dorchester, which the Dorchester Heights has a commanding view of the harbor and Boston City to where he could threaten British shipping. How to get him there? Well, he's already got them from Fort Ticonderoga here, so he's just going to have to basically walk these things to Caravan, the continuation of that Noble Train, all the way to Dorchester. So they pick a date from his headquarters on Brattle Street. They decide to plan. They are going to start shooting light shots at Boston from here on the 4th of March. And that's going to disguise the sound of the cannons. Now, problem is you can still see them. It's all mostly low-lying land. You could see movement and you could hear whispers in Boston from out here in the frontier area. And so they also devise a plan of building these chandeliers. And I don't mean like these shanty, ceiling ornaments, like structures where they would put in hay bales, and they would put them in there, these bales of hay in this wooden structure, and they would use these as organic temporary bulletproof walls, and they would hide the viewing of the cannons moving down south across the Boston Neck, south of Boston Neck, and across through Roxbury and up into Dorchester. This would happen on the 4th, the 5th, and into the 6th of March. And when he was able to fortify Dorchester Heights, he built that all up in one night to ensure that the British couldn't see it. He kept the cannons out of view until the very last second when he was able to fortify the heights in Dorchester. And when Howe woke up in the morning, they saw the fortifications, and Howe was famously known for going up and looking with his side bag and said, "My God, those fellows have done more work in one night than my army could do in 3 months." From that point, he knew that he couldn't supply his soldiers because shipping would be threatened. They couldn't move the ships of the line into the harbor. He sued for peace. Now, again, the Declaration of Independence hadn't been signed. Washington had no mandate to crush the British regulars. His mandate was to get them out of Boston. They agreed. And from Dorchester Heights, he was able to move his soldiers down the heights and into Boston, securing it as the British were evacuating 250 years ago from March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. So I'm going to take you over to Dorchester Heights. You can kind of see that area. You can see the commanding view of Boston City from there and the skyline. I'm going to run you up to here real quick so you guys can see the view of this area. So hang on tight, and I'll bring you back up top. Okay, so here's the top of the Citadel monument. Inside behind me, the gate is just the area for people who are servicing and maintaining the monument to be able to change the flag out when necessary. It just has a little sign that says, 1903 when this place was dedicated. And I come around here. You see how the Citadel was about this height. So this is where they would have positions at the Boston Regular, Boston proper, and where the regular army for the British was stationed. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can kind of see the perspective from this area. There's Boston. So now you have an idea of the view they would have had. Of course, none of these houses, none of these buildings would have been here, but the distance far side the harbor, they couldn't do anything, so they had to move to Dorchester. So, but it's this location, January 1st, 1776, where the first flag of a united fighting force, not just, militiamen and from Massachusetts or rabble rousers in Long Island, New York. This is the actual first time the American flag, designed with the 13 stripes of the current flag, was first flown here in Somerville, which was, like I say, at the time, this is mostly part of Cambridge, and the Army of the United States first mustered under it here on Prospect Hill Park. So that's essentially all of that. Now I'm going to show you, take you down to Dorchester so you can see the heights from there, so you can understand a little bit better perspective. Also, you can see kind of Boston's a little bit closer. The downtown area is much more visible from there because it's much closer to the harbor, and they were able to prevent the ships from coming in. So, very important area. I kind of want everyone to know a little bit more about it. Now you kind of know where it is. And I thank you guys for coming along with me on this little journey. Keep watching on the next one, and we'll keep moving along.